we have four industry experts to come to share with you their insights about privileged access management. We have Sean Kennedy, Director, Enterprise IAM Strategy from Royal Bank of Canada. We also have Nasim from York University. Nasim is the Director of Identity and Access Management. I will also ask two our speakers, Anirban and Don, to join this presentation. So that's our elite panel for privileged access management. All right, so let me stop sharing here. All right, so as you can see, that's our panel. All right, so welcome to the panel. Maybe let's do a quick introduction. Since Don and Annabelle, we already introduced you, so let's give a chance to Sean and Nasim. Maybe Sean, can you do a quick self-introduction?
I've been working at the bank for the past 3 years, and one of the areas of focus in our strategy was privileged access management. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. And Sean is dealing with a lot of PAM initiatives, and you have the experience working with some of the largest PAM project, right? So with a government or in your past consulting experience.
Yeah, so IAM as a whole is part of my background. So very, very large IAM projects at both the federal and provincial governments.
Excellent. Great. So look forward to your insights. And Nasim, can you quickly do your self-introduction?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. And to the two presenters as well, Anirban and Don. It was excellent info. A little bit of background about myself, Nasim Hazari. I'm the Director of Identity and Access Management here at York. Identity and Access Management is really near and dear to me. I've been doing IAM work for about 18 years or so on both sides of the spectrum. I was fortunate to work on the professional services side and now in the higher ed sector, and really, enjoying the way this domain is sort of evolving over time. And really excited to be here. And congratulations, Brian, for continuing to kind of raise awareness to this platform on these important topics in cybersecurity.
Thank you, Nasim. And Don and Anirban, I already introduced you, but I'll give you a chance to talk one thing like a special about yourself. Maybe Anirban, you want to start?
I like listening to all kinds of music, and my favorite type of music is rock, and I really like 60s, 70s, those types of things.
Wonderful. That give you the creative ideas?
I don't know about that, but that's something. Yep.
All right. Yep. Okay. Don, what's interesting about you?
One of the things a lot of people don't know about me is I went to the University of Alaska in Anchorage for college as a computer science major, and when I graduated, I spent the next 8 months riding my motorcycle across Canada and the United States. So,
wow,
great time,
okay.
Great experience, absolutely.
Wow, nice. That's a very unique experience. Excellent. All right, cool. I don't know if they will give you the privileged access to those special place.
I know, right?
We'll talk about that in different places. All right, let's start our panel. So we have four industry experts there. So from their background, you can see some of them from the technology, vendor, and solution side. Some of them from consulting, some of them from the practice, implementation on the large organization side. So we bring you different perspectives. So I really encourage you to ask all kind of questions. So let's start with the first interesting questions. Our two solo speakers already introduced the PAM and some foundation concepts. I'd like to ask you guys, what is the biggest misconception of PAM? Something people often make it not that correct, or something not like a right way. So what do you think is the biggest misconception of PAM to your mind?
So a few things to come to mind. So maybe I'll take a crack at this one.
Yeah.
I think generally speaking, PAM, because of the importance of PAM and why we want to deploy, PAM program, organizations are, once they're bought in, they're quite eager to kind of jump ahead and start solving the problem. But the misconception really comes from, treating PAM as purely a technology solution, right? We buy a product, we implement the product, and now we've got, full controls figured out for privileged access management. I think that is sort of a misconception that catches a lot of folks, and why I mentioned that, although, technology is partly the solution, the broader context is kind of governance and the context of the environment, right? And more specifically, defining what privileged access really means by asset type, the ownerships, and the making sure that there's appropriate buy-in, and not just kind of treating PAM programs purely as a centrally deployed and centrally governed program versus treating it more like a hub and spoke model, right? Where you have to get buy-in across the organization, especially from areas where there are IT administrative functions being done, right? So those two things are I think are common misconceptions that we get to hear about quite a bit.
Excellent. One is we love to talk about technology, but as we can see also from the presentation we already saw, PAM is not just about technology. And another is centralization. We will talk about that more. And any other people want to comment on the misconception you observed?
So yeah, I'll add on to what Nasim was saying. It really isn't a silver bullet. It's not one of those tools that you pull out of the box and click a few OK buttons and then you say, okay, we've got PAM. You really have to have some thought and understanding as to what it is that you're trying to accomplish. As Nasim said, it's a tool that's going to help you protect your environment and provide you with the control, but you have to understand why you're doing it. Otherwise, you won't necessarily be successful in getting the adoption. You have to basically sell the solution to the users that are going to be using it, because if you don't have the adoption for the end users, it's not going to be successful.
All right. So echo the point Nasim mentioned. So it's not like a click and click several buttons, you can set it up. It's a quite complex process. All right, cool. Anyone else want to comment? Anirban?
One thing that I thought about it is maybe the amount of work that needs to go into implementing a successful PAM project. And I always am careful to use the wording PAM project, not a PAM, solution per se, because a PAM solution is only part of the project itself. Sometimes people underestimate the amount of time it would take, because if you look at the maturity curve for an organization, if you're a SMB company and you're maturing into a mid-market company, going from, let's say, 800 people to 1,500 people, so on and so forth, it is a change in mindset. It is a change in mindset where you have to agree to invest time and energy in building out, as the panelists have clearly mentioned. You need to have a strategy. What are you going to do with it? I give you a Rolls Royce. You don't know how to drive it. What's the point? So you need to be invested in that project itself. And I sometimes have seen people have not grasped that the entire animal from head to tail. You gotta embrace that before you actually take a jump in the pool.
All right. So PAM tool or solution is just one component. Itself, like what you said, it's a project, right? So you have an objective, you have a stakeholder. So once you talk about projects, so you all kind of project management things also coming, the communication, integration, all those things coming out. All right, perfect. And Don, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, I think this has all been great, and I'll add on to that as not trying to minimize the complexity and the effort that needs to put into that, because it is something, like I mentioned, it's a mindset, right? You got to look at it differently than just, I'm going to go buy a product and install it and all of a sudden I'm protected. So yeah, just keep thinking about it as a mindset, and that's something you constantly has to evolve and has to be thought of.
Okay, perfect. So it's a project, it's a mindset. It's not just about the tools. So that's great insights for the Pam. So that's also especially helpful for people thinking about Pam solution in the future, or thinking about how to do better with their current implementation. All right. So that's a misconception about Pam. So let's talk about why. So two speakers already mentioned why Pam is important. But why Pam is important? Because there are so many other areas are also important, right? So in the cybersecurity, as we know, I think Don, you also covered something like zero trust, right? So there are so many areas also very important. What kind of things make Pam so special? Because a company, which means company need to invest whatever time, effort, and resource on it. Why Pam is so special?
So, I mean, from my perspective, there are a few good reasons. I think Anirban and Don highlighted a lot of good reasons on why Pam is important. But two things really kind of jump out for me. At the end of the day, it kind of comes up to the impact, right? The impact of a compromise. So, what are we protecting at the end of the day? We're protecting IDs with elevated privileged access. So, what does that mean? We've been using that term. But what it actually means is that fundamentally these IDs have rights that can actually change the behavior of the system. That's quite significant, right? The system is designed to perform or function a certain way, but these IDs can actually go, change the behavior of the system itself and make it look and feel different. But not only that, right? The other thing is that these IDs also have inherent rights that allow them to kind of move laterally, right? So you can, an adversary may actually compromise a privileged ID and move laterally and get additional privileged access. Thus, in effect, what's happening is that the surface area of the attack can expand exponentially, right? So this is different from protecting regular IDs. I think that the rate at which a problem can grow is significant. So the act of, let's say, doing a reconnaissance, right, becomes very easy if you're able to compromise a privileged account. So I think there are some fundamental differences why privileged access is so critical and important. And I'm sure there are many other examples.
Excellent. Wow, definitely. That's a really, from a hacking point of view, that's a really make the privileged identity so valuable to hackers. And that's also the reason you want to put more emphasis on that. And Sean, what's your view on that?
So one of the things that referring back to Anirban's presentation, was the number of identities within the organization is exploding. We have DevOps, we have external applications, SaaS applications. We now have business users that have privileges to add and delete users themselves. So Pam will help to cover you from things that are not necessarily that traditional. I'm a Windows administrator, I'm a root account administrator, I know how I'm administering a mainframe. It gives you a set of capabilities that will extend your ability to manage that privileged access across multiple areas, starting from the business users all the way down to those domain and root administrators. So I think it's one of those areas where it gives you a broader coverage as opposed to what you traditionally did in the past with server protection.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good insight, because the scope of that is very wide, like what you said. And it's not just the people, right? So it's also related to systems, and so the ID for the applications. So that's also very important. Excellent. Don and Anirban, anything to add on to this?
The one thing that I've always been interested in is, when we look at Pam, what is it in Pam that is way more important than other products in security, right? Mm-hmm. So the way I think about it is, if you have two situations where you have your child standing in front of an ice cream vendor and he wants an ice cream, and the other option is, the other situation is, you've given the child the ice cream but you won't let him lick the ice cream. In which situation do you think the child will scream more? In my case, for people who have children, I will tell you, with my children, if I did this, in the second case, I will not survive to see the next day. So the point is that with PAM, we kind of run the risk a little bit of giving access, but kind of tightening the noose a little bit on behavior. That is a very friction generating kind of an event. And therefore, the just in time aspect of PAM has to be extremely smooth, extremely fast. It demands by the type of product PAM is that the just in time aspect of PAM has to actually be way more smoother, way more simpler, faster than any other product that also provides just in time. So that's one area where I think that why is it important? Because it can do just in time, but it's also important to understand the just in time functionality has to be super simple and easily accessible versus so you live to see another day, essentially.
I really like your story as also the ice cream lover. So anyone going to me that take that away, that's really something I don't like, right? So the privilege in this case, because once people say, okay, this is actually related to power, right? So people want to say, okay, I can do this, right? So if you take away that, even though I may not use that often, but it's hard to take away something I already have. So that's a perfect analogy. And Don, well, what's your view on this?
Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. And I agree with that. I think there's also a trend of why it's important is really the change and adoption of compliances getting stricter and more tightening around the world, but especially when we look at areas around identity, and I brought up NIST and how of NIST being just that privileged access management component. And so I think it's important that as we see those changing and as compliances get stricter and stricter and the laws and penalties for data breaches and content being breached out of an organization, we see that that cost of a single identity breach can be massive, especially if they're able to get privileged identities, and especially if it's fast because they don't have to spend as much time to escalate those privileges. That cost is becoming outrageous just for one breach like that. So I think it's important to look at the way the industry is trending, but also how the compliances are trending towards managing those identities and preventing users having privileged access.
Excellent. So especially for current situation, everyone work from home, right? So the only way to differentiate you and other bad guys is like an identity and that related access privilege. So that's a really important. Excellent. All right, so let's move on to the next question or the topic. So what kind of a key consideration? So I think you mentioned, I think Anirban also talked about that. So it's a project. It's not just a solution. So what kind of considerations you can put? Let's say I want to, or this organization want to implement a PAM. That's actually also one question submitted from our audience, Vittorio. So what do you think are the preliminary activities we need to accomplish before we even start a PAM program? What kind of considerations you want to put there? I'd like to ask Sean, because Sean is a strategy side. So before we even start that program, what kind of things you want to consider?
Sure. So I guess I'm thinking about this in terms of foundations and looking at it from the perspective of, in order to build a project or an implementation of PAM, you would be looking at doing something based on why you need it. So the foundation is your governance, your policies, and all of the controls and regulatory controls and compliance requirements that you are looking to meet. That's the foundation. And then secondly, you're going to have to use those policies and regulatory requirements to build what are you looking to implement? How are you going to, what are you looking to protect in your environment to make sure that you're going to meet all of those requirements? The next thing I think that we would be looking at is understanding what is it out there in your ecosystem. I think a lot of organizations don't have any real clue as to the magnitude of identities that they have out there. And I think in order for you to even think about designing a project or a plan to implement a PAM solution, you need to understand how big is this going to be? How do you prioritize all of the things that are out there? Again, relating to Anirban's presentation, things are related to risk. So if you're starting and looking at everything from a high risk perspective, that's where you're going to take your focus, and then your plan rolls out moving from higher to lower risk as you mature your solution. But I think governance is definitely a foundation on which you're going to make decisions on how to build your project. Perfect.
And you touch on several key elements, the consideration there. One really is, why do you need it? So to achieve what kind of, like if you start a program, what kind of objectives you want to meet, right? So the second one is really to check, what do you have? What kind of things? So if you have only like on-premise, that's totally different than from you 100% on cloud, then also different from like a mixed environment or multi-cloud environment, right? So that's really, and the risk and the governance part is also very important. Excellent. And anyone else want to share your insights, the consideration of a PAM project?
Yeah, I think definitely agree with a lot of things that that Sean had mentioned there from a strategy and a risk management standpoint, right? Looking at exactly what is needed. The other thing that that I'd add to this is, once the program actually starts, and perhaps even before it starts, is to get a good grasp and understanding on two aspects, right? Change management and change champions. I think inevitably this sort of program will have a widespread impact from a change perspective. So having change champions across the organization who are, good advocates from a risk standpoint and understand the why, right? Why do we do privileged access management is really important. And then, of course, defining the metrics as well, right? So from a how do we measure the fact that we're actually getting the type of optimal adoption as we want? So KPIs and KRIs, it's a big aspect of it. What I like to always say is that we can't measure if we can't measure, then we can't manage, right? So that's one aspect of it. I was trying to think about an analogy related to Anirban's theme of food-related analogies, but I can't find one right now. But I guess KPI. Do I have enough food in the fridge? That might be an aspect. So really, at the end of the day, it's KPIs and KRI. Critical.
Yeah. I guess the key question I will ask: have you got your dinner yet? Since we keep coming back to the food question, I had my ice cream anyway, so that's no problem. So that's great. The change management, change impact, and the metrics. So we will touch on the success factors in another topic. And so here, really, it's a change management, because a project, you need people to work on that. And like Anirban's ice cream, you take privilege away from people or control that. You really need to manage that impact and what kind of change people need to do it. All right. And Don, any insight from your end?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we could probably have this conversation, for all evening. Coming from a vendor side that has a solution on the market, I think it's important to really look in the different technologies. I think there's just so many options out there. I think it's important to really weigh the different options and where those limitations and gaps fall, because at this stage, I think it's still one of those technologies that, one size doesn't fit all, and there may be scenarios where multiple solutions are required, and there may be scenarios where a particular product just does not meet the needs as another. So I just that due diligence in analyzing the technology and seeing where these products are the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, technology choice and comparison and options and all those areas are also very, although we say it's a project, it's a mindset, but technology still play a very, very important role here, or maybe multiple technologies. Okay, excellent. Anirban, what's your view? I like your background picture because that's in the restaurant. No wonder you're always using food and
it's empty, right? Because of COVID, just me. No, I really feel that the panelists have hit every nail that needs to be mentioned. Referring to what Don just mentioned, it's actually an interesting point that it depends on the size of the organization and also the maturity level of the organization. But for the really large ones, it is rarely the case that you will have one privilege management solution doing it all under the hood. So there will always be a realistic chance that there will be two products kind of helping you with your program. So people should be open to something of that sort too, because it's not the failure of a specific product. It's not the failure of project management per se. It's just the reality that you use a knife to cut a cake. You don't use the chainsaw to cut a cake. So you use whatever is best for your situation. And
Perfect.
there we go with the food-related analogies again.
Knife utilities. Yeah. So yeah, you also touch on very great point. It's sometimes when things doesn't work or doesn't work as how we expected, we tend to blame vendors and blame the tools. Doesn't matter, it's Microsoft, Thycotic. But the question is, do you really know the tool? How do you use that tool? The training also very important, right? So for example, like in our cloud security experiential learning, if we didn't even know there's a PIM and we didn't set up correctly in the PIM, it's really hard for us to manage the privilege on the learning environment. But once we know that, it's just a piece of cake and it's so easy to set it up. So the knowledge and how you use the tool is also very important. Excellent. All right, so let's move on to another question here. Consideration we already touched on. And so what are some mistakes? Because there's also a question from audience. Okay, what kind of common mistakes related to PAM things? Or we spin that a little bit. What kind of challenges to the to when you implement PAM? So people can get a little bit of awareness about, okay, there may be some roadblocks along the road, right? So you cannot be aware and try to avoid this. And so Nasim, you want to start?
Sure, yeah, no, absolutely. I think many of the points were raised previously. And when it comes to challenges, I think the dynamics are changing now, right? So the way we operate and the way the IT landscape has changed over time. Some of these things are not new. Some of these things they used to be new, but they're no longer new. The fact that there's a widespread adoption of cloud that is no longer a new thing. We're dealing with that reality today. But what makes PAM a little bit more challenging, I think, I'll pick one example from a DevOps standpoint, right? If we really look at the way DevOps processes work, from a coding to building, testing, and then to release management, and then to operations, you can think about this whole thing as a chain, right? And along the way in this chain, you have a variety of different tools that are being used. Every single one of those tools, they have privileged access in there somehow, right? So what ends up happening is that by compromising one aspect of that chain or one link in that chain, you're compromising that entire process. So the complexity and the challenge in today's reality is that we do have some quite sophisticated DevOps practices. And so now we're in the world of PAM, and we're trying to discover privileged accounts and privileged accesses, and what do they mean? And then now we are faced with the reality of a DevOps process. So how do I find all the privileged accesses to make sure that I don't break any aspect of this chain? Because by doing so, the weakest link in the chain will effectively break the whole chain, right? So that's the complexity, and that's a challenge. And then, I will add one additional thing over here. I think from a higher ed perspective, there are certain interesting scenarios as well. The reality in higher ed right now is that whether we're talking about IGA, whether we're talking about PAM, we're talking about access management, the reality is that an identity will have multiple personas. So what do I mean by personas? You're going to have students, faculties, and staff, or any variation of that. So anytime we talk about identity management, PAM is no exception. there's that additional layer of complexity that comes from dealing with multiple authoritative sources of an identity. Different flavors of rule sets that are derived from multiple personas. In other words, it may be completely legitimate for an individual to have a privileged access under one persona, but not under another persona. So you may be a student and you may also be a staff. So it may be legitimate for you to have privileged access as a staff, but not as a student. And so I think there's a very interesting kind of a intersection right now between access management and privileged access management in the context of a dual persona. So that's a challenge. I think definitely applicable in higher ed, but it may by extension apply to other areas as well.
Excellent. So I like your example you put for the students, right? So the multiple personas, because you have to understand your context. So like a bank may be different from the university, colleges, that may be different from the non-for-profit organization. So you have to understand the business, the process, the complexity about those. You also mentioned the DevOps, right? So that's another kind of a chain of things. At the end of the day is attack surface, right? So because it's not a fair game. Hackers just need one, and we need to protect so many places. Yeah. Sean, what's your view on that?
So I was looking at it a little bit different perspective, and this is sort of going to address some questions that people may have about a net new PAM program. We talked, Nasim had talked about earlier about the organizational change management and change champions. You have a set of consumers out there that have done things the same way, and if you're a mainframe or a Unix administrator, they've done it for 20, 30 years. And now all of a sudden you're trying to implement something that's, it's going to be perceived as a roadblock. So the way that you're going to be getting adoption for your program is going to be related to the benefits that you can portray to the users of the system, ensuring that you're actually protecting them from any bad actors out there that may happen to gain access to something. It's going to be completely audited that it wasn't them that did any of this work or any of this malicious behavior. I think getting those people on board and selling it to them early and getting them involved, helping them make decisions is going to be a key hurdle for you to overcome when you're looking at implementing something net new.
Excellent. You mentioned the legacy system. I don't call it legacy. It's just some like a technology implemented before, right? So, but still use. And when you implement a PAM and any other, if you touch on that areas, how do you sell your project and the benefits and involve them in the project? That's a key factors, right? So otherwise, you will not only technology, you have a complexity, but also you have a people side, the resistance. Okay, all right. Don, anything from your end? The challenges.
Yeah, I'll add around some of the challenges are a little bit of just over-engineering or making these too complex. And you see it, we saw it a lot when MFA became a necessity. It became a burden, and when something's a burden and it prohibits productivity, people find a way around it, or they don't end up adopting it, and the organization doesn't adopt it. So it is important to make sure that we're looking at these things and balancing that productivity and security at the same time, and making sure we're not making this too complex, but at the same time providing the security that we need. So just kind of stepping back and making sure that the solution we land on, or solutions really take into account how are the end users going to be impacted, and is that going to improve or increase or decrease productivity. It's important to keep that in mind.
Excellent. So that's also the key element for the usability, productivity, because people still want to do things faster, right, or easier. But when you implement any security controls, oftentimes it may slow down things, right? So all the extra steps. So how do you kind of manage that, make things as simple as possible? Excellent. That's a great input. Anirban, what's your view on that?
I think the other members have hit every single point. only just to repeat one quick thing, because I think it's important, which is when we talk about various dashboards with this movement into the cloud area, SaaS area, adopting various services, what we're dealing with today is kind of a little bit of the shadow IT phenomena, where sales says, hey, I like this CRM, I'm going to use this CRM. Marketing says, hey, I like Marketo or something, I'm going to use Marketo. So the days of a centralized purchasing process saying these are the applications that are authorized for purchase, they're kind of gone. People, and it's exactly going back to the ice cream analogy, that once you have the ability to purchase a product that you like and use the product that you like, taking away that product causes so much friction in any organization. So it is a reality that you have to embrace some of these third-party products, whether you like it or not. And therefore, PAM strategy has to enable the acceptance of these products. You cannot have a PAM strategy that says, no, we're not going to let you use that. No, that's not going to work. And that's the main issue, that you have to accept and live with it, essentially. I would say that is a big problem, because today, till now, traditionally, PAM has been focused on assets, infrastructure, assets, accounts, various types of things. We haven't really thought of like fast changing, fast moving dashboards, because one typical problem is, even if you have, let's say, a dashboard on which you have implemented PAM, the vendor is not going to talk to you and change the dashboard midway through the year. What do you do then? It's a refresh of the dashboard, just like Salesforce refreshes its UI. So these are some things that you need to think through, like what is our strategy around it? There is no perfect silver bullet, as has been mentioned, but you need to at least accept the fact that these are things we need to account for.
Mm. Yeah, so you also mentioned the flexibility, because reality is people want to use the things they like, they familiar, or they easy for them to do it. You mentioned the CRM systems, you mentioned maybe there's some marketing tools, there's another tool, the cloud, right? People love those things. So on one side, you want to control, but on the other side, if you always, like security people always say no, right? So that's a kind of pressure we have. But the thing is, how can you make as a business enabler, right? So how can you work on that? Even though the current solution may not have that, but how can you kind of move on, improve on that one? So that's a key consideration, which on vendor side also, you need to kind of keep improving, right? So that to allow those things. Perfect. All right. So we touched on the metrics already. So Nasim, I think Nasim and Anirban all touch on that one, metrics. So you must know how good you are. Just like I want to lose some weight. The best way to do it, every day I need to put weigh my weight. There's a scale. So now I know I'm on the track. So how do you know you are on the track for the PAM project? So any insights? What kind of doesn't matter, it's a KPI, KRI, or any other metrics? What's your suggestion to measure your success? And Sean, you can start.
Yeah. So from my perspective, one of the important things is to understand, I had mentioned this earlier, that you need to know what is out there in order to understand what you need to protect. And I think your performance indicators are going to be that change in percentage coverage. When you say, okay, I have 10,000 of these Windows machines and I have the local admins, I only have 300 of them onboarded to our PAM solution. As time goes by, you're obviously going to want to close that gap and get those things as close to 100%. But going across platforms, many different applications, and then going back to that foundational piece where you've identified through governance exactly which things are a certain level of risk, and knocking them down from that view as well. So getting a dashboard that says, here are applications that are very high risk, here are platforms that are high risk associated with these platforms or these applications. How do I make sure that I prioritize those for onboarding? And as time goes by, you're going to make sure that your roadmap identifies those priorities for onboarding.
Excellent. So that's back to the dashboard concept, right? So you need to measure the gaps, and you need to know what we have right now, and then 1 month later, or maybe 3 months later, what kind of change? What do I address the risk level? Do I have a more kind of a critical things on board? What's the percentage of how many things left? How many things change? So those visibilities are really critical for the PAM solution. Excellent. Don, anything from your end, you think?
Yeah, like almost any project, I think it's important to, elicit that feedback from the users that are being impacted. It could be in the form of simple surveys or somehow awarding people to provide that feedback, so you can adjust on the fly and make sure the solution that's being implemented is having a positive impact and not a negative one. At the end of the day, any solution should have a positive impact. But I mean, we've talked a lot about best practices and challenges, and they all kind of fall back to if we're going to do this, if we're going to be more secure, we've got to make sure we manage that, balance that productivity of the users as well, to make sure we're not making it worse than it was before.
Okay, yeah, for the balance and watch out the feedback. That's also very important. Nasim, anything from your end?
No, so definitely I agree with Sean and Don. I think making sure that we keep track against that overall 100%. What does 100% mean, and how close are we getting to that 100%? And then having change champions, crucially important to make sure that there's appropriate adoption. The other thing too is through that change management process to set the expectation is that overall 100% would likely change as well over time as the program continues. I think that we would likely start a program by thinking that these set of assets and IDs are in scope, and we'll start with that being the 100%. But the reality, as we know, is that legacy access starts to get compounded with new access, right? So over time, an individual may have started as a non-privileged user, but through compounding of access, now they've become privileged. And those things are not known right out the gate. So that 100% changes over time. And so change management becomes critical then, right? Setting the expectation that, hey, we have to accept the fact that we discovered new things, and then we have to onboard them as well. So I add that point.
So it's not just I get it done, then that's it. Forget about it. It's also changing, right? So the things you covered before, maybe already there's new things happening there. So you need to address those changes as well. The change management very important. Anirban, what's your view on this?
One quick thing and this is again from a colleague of mine, Anshul Kaushik at Thycotic. He has come up with this very intuitive and useful thing called the Pam Maturity Model. Essentially, this Pam Maturity Model helps customers and in general companies understand where do I stand on the spectrum. Because again, as we go back to the original thing of that it's a program, and as Nasim, Sean, Don mentioned, what are the various things that you look for, KPIs, KRIs. Each level of maturity defines what KPIs can you measure. What should it be that you're shooting towards? When do you say yes, I'm moving over to the next level? If needed, we can also share that as a link later afterwards. But that might be something to also help people to understand where do I stand on that spectrum and where is my journey going? Good, bad, ugly. How am I tracking?
Yeah, that's very helpful because people can have some reference, the framework, and to map to. That's great. So if you can share the link, we can get to that. And, all right. So so that's for the current metrics and how do we measure the success. All right. Let's talk a little bit. So we come to the almost near the end of the panel. So we like to talk about two things. One is we talk about the history, what happened currently. I like to talk a little bit about the industry trends, where the industry is going in the next maybe a year or 2 years or 3 years, especially for the PAM solutions. So what kind of cool things happening there, or what kind of major changes are coming? So I'd like to hear your insights on that. Maybe I can start with Annabelle, since you started 2 startups, so you're probably more sensitive to those signals.
One of the areas that we have seen push in the direction of is PAM traditionally has been something that has required caring and feeding. And so when somebody makes a purchase, there is always a budget set aside to say that, okay, we will have to spend some time in understanding how this product works, training, all these things. However, as we adopt more services from the SaaS side, as we adopt more services from the IaaS side, the world has changed. The mindset has changed. People are expecting that the product should be set it and forget it. Even though we have not reached that stage with PAM 100%, we have to move in that direction. So when we talk about how can we make life easier for the customer, one of the areas that we get asked about is, do you have any machine learning based capabilities, AI based capabilities, so that we can identify policies in advance that these things are changing, this is what's happening, so on and so forth. Essentially getting away from the caring and feeding of make your own policies, make sure they are up to date, are they actually being implemented or not, is it good, bad, ugly, where do we stand? These are some of the areas where we see people are asking for automation in a sense, so that it helps them not spend time on setting the product up, and it makes 100%, it is aligned with the goals of any vendor, because as a vendor, our goal is to lower the bar of adoption. Any customer, anybody who wants to try this product, you should be good to go in 5 minutes. That's an aspirational goal for PAM, but at least we have to go towards that, and this is one of the areas where we are being asked to go towards.
Excellent. Yeah, so this is I like your sentence, make life easier, right? Yes. So a lot of times we're still on a manual basis. So one thing I don't like as a cybersecurity professional, I love a lot of things. So the one thing I don't like is to manage the policies, because there's this huge and update. And so if we can automate those things, so that's actually definitely the goal for there. And you mentioned AI, machine learning, right? So there's all those emerging technology, hopefully can play with that. All right, so Sean, what's your view on that?
So what I was saying is that in our roadmap, we're looking at a roadmap that has to support our cloud bases, whether it's workloads being deployed to the cloud or consumption and migration of workforce users into cloud-based applications. So for me, that's going to be the area of innovation when it comes to PAM. Traditionally, it's been an on-premise solution. So being able to support that, we're definitely looking for the industry to start focusing in and doing the research and development to be able to support that more seamlessly. Because right now you can do a lot of customization and scripting and programming yourself, or pay vendors to do it, but it needs to be a broader, a wider supported platform for PAM suppliers, or I guess PAM consumers.
Okay, that's a great insight. So we have two representatives from the solution providers, so definitely they will listen to your insight. All right, cool. All right, so Don, what's your view on the industry?
Yeah, I'm probably going to repeat a little bit of what I mentioned before, but I really see just the overall regulations changing, and as companies and industries adopt these regulations, you're just going to see more and more emphasis on restricting access, limiting access, just protecting that overall access management solution above and beyond the typical standards of passwords and MFA. So I think we're absolutely going to see more and more regulations, and obviously they're going to be more strict as more and more of these things happen. So I know I've said it before, but I think that's just really something to look forward in the future, that it's one of those things that's going to be somewhat of a commodity, hopefully, because it definitely can have a huge impact on our overall security footprint.
Okay, so you touch on the compliance, regulatory requirements, and all those things, because oftentimes the great way, because people think about when is the best time we implement PAM and how can we get priority, all those things. But the thing is, if there's a regulatory requirements, compliance, right, regardless whether you like it or not, you need to do it. So that's the thing coming, right? So from strategy, risk side, you need to consider this. And looks like the industry has more and more things emphasized on that. Doesn't matter any other framework or things, they all have a PAM component related there. So that's the importance. Nasim, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of interesting things that are going on. The one that I find interesting is sort of the intersection, as I mentioned, between like access management side and privileged access management side. I'm careful not to use the word convergence, right? That's might mean something else, but the intersection between the two. And why is that? Is because of the nature in which we're operating now. I think more and more adaptive and contextual authentication is critical. We're in this world where data-driven authentication is critical. I think when it comes to privileged access management, the fact that in today's day and age with the situation that we're in with COVID, we have privileged administrators who are logging in remotely. So when am I logging in? How am I logging in? Which device am I using? All those things are data points. So I think there's a lot of sophistication that is in the access management space, and there's also sophistication in the privileged access management space. And so therefore I find that intersection quite interesting and really excited to see what where we end up in the next few years.
Excellent. Yeah, so there are definitely some like overlap, and also I think when this is also related to some. I think is Anirban you mentioned that the industry still don't have a like a standard for PAM or like a protocol or something like that, right? Is that right? So like API things.
Yes.
So those are
Correct.
the things kind of industry is working on.
Correct. I mean, and there's been efforts. For example, the good news is there have been successful efforts in terms of data sharing. So for example, if we look at the government sector, there are protocols like STIX and TAXI that are available, publish subscribe-based models, SAML, OAuth, all these things have kind of done things successfully. So there is a past history that we can all get inspired by. And the good news is we have been successful as an industry to have protocols and processes in place, which makes sense. With the PAM, essentially, I think the open source movement in the PAM sector has not been as successful or has not been as, I would say, widespread as in other areas. And that is one of the reasons why, because of the lack of a lot of groundswell. If you don't have the groundswell for open source, these types of things oftentimes don't move forward very well. The other way is that vendors have very little in terms of initiative or incentive. Why should I collaborate with somebody else? We collaborate with each other. We collaborate with our partners and other vendors every day. That's not an issue. But where is the incentive for me to say, I'm going to spend $200,000 and I'm going to have 3 developers and I'm going to work with his product and her product and all that? That's the primary issue. So it is a thorn in everybody's side for sure.
Excellent. Yeah. So that's the reason you want to do some innovation, and the reason it's coming, right? So the standardization is also important to address a lot of because we all touch on those legacy systems, different vendor providers, the scope of the things. So some of this protocol will really help to address those concerns. Excellent. All right. So last question before we finish the PAM is really on the talent development side. We always reserve this question to the last. So if you can, just a very quick tip or the suggestion for people are interested in PAM or anything like related to identity access management, privilege access management in that domain, which is one of the important domain for cybersecurity. So what's your suggestion to people are interested in this one? What kind of skills, or doesn't matter, skills, certification, or knowledge they need to acquire? So what's your suggestion there? Maybe I start with Sean, because maybe you can hire some people, right, from the group, right? So you give them some guidance.
Yeah, so there really is, this is one area that's very, very specialized, and there's definitely, when you go out to implement any type of project and you're looking for a shortfall, IAM as a whole has a shortfall of resources, but PAM specifically, there are very limited resources. So there's 2 areas where, so I think there's 2 areas where you can focus. One of them is understanding the concepts, strategies for PAM, and then secondly would be something that's very specific, so vendor specific. You pick a product and get certified in that, because they're very similar in terms of the capabilities, but how they're implemented and how they work is very specific across vendors. So I would say there's two different areas depending on if you're more on the strategy and governance side, learning about it, or product specific side.
Perfect. So one is a general strategy, the practice, the process. The other is a more product-driven, product domain kind of knowledge. But regardless of what your message is, industry lack a lot of talent in this domain, right? So there's a hard to find the right people in this one. So that's for people interested in career development. There's actually some opportunities there. Okay, Don, what's your view about talent development?
Yeah, I agree with what Sean mentioned. There's definitely a shortfall of talent when it gets specific to really focusing on privileged access management. And you know, if identity and access management a whole is something that interests you, being able to specialize in something like privileged access management is going to be very important. And I think a way of doing that, and I think Nasim brought this up earlier, is understanding it's not always about the technology. You could become an expert in that particular product, but really it's about understanding the concept, and again, that mindset, which is, who are the personas in my environment? What am I trying to protect? What are the roles in my environment? What does that actually look like outside of a technology perspective, right? Who's going to require access to what and when and why, and how can we make that flexible for them? So it's really stepping outside of the technology and just really understanding how business works differently when we're looking at providing access to users.
So understand the business process and operations are very critical. All right. So Nasim, what's your view on that one?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I'll echo the same thing that Sean and Don had mentioned. I think folks who are interested in privileged access management, I'd say that you're probably 10 to 15% already there. The fact that you're interested in it, and so now the next step really is to kind of reach out to the community that we have here, right, through this platform. And just from a technical standpoint, I think administrative, having a broad spectrum of experience with, let's say, administrative functions at Windows, Linux, network layer databases, I think that is, somewhat unique when it comes to PAM. So I'd say maybe, focusing on that along with, DevOps practices and so on. But yeah, like I said, with me, everything starts with interest. So if you've got an interest in it, you're off to a good start.
Yeah, great. So you have opportunity if you're in IT field, if you're in dev field, development field, or business, so you already have some base, right? So leverage that, then add a PAM component on that. Yeah. Excellent. And Anirban, what's your view on this?
I think I just echo whatever Nasim, Don, and Sean have said. It really is that, they've touched on all the points as to what you need in order to be part of the community and join the community and be part of the PAM family. The only thing I would say is that even though we are at a state of maturity where we still have ways to go, that should not turn off anybody. Yes, it's a lot of work. Yes, it needs couple of hours for anybody to understand, really work with various types of groups. The only thing is that since PAM can sometimes be very cross-functional, anyone who has the ability to kind of work with people, because ultimately we are all salespeople, we're all selling something, ourselves or whoever it is. If you have the ability to talk to people and listen, and God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so let's use that. So if you can follow that, I think you will be very successful in the PAM sector.
Excellent. Yeah. So you touch on actually soft skills as well, yes. Right? So just like explain PAM, so if you can use a normal way to explain, but you can also use Anirban's ice cream story to explain, right? So that's actually make the total difference. So people will buy for that. Oh, God. So okay, all right, let's wrap up. Okay, so I feel it's a kind of a really hungry time. All right, okay, thank you very much. So that's all the questions we have, and thank you very much. So I thank you for our 4 industry experts to share their insights. We talk about what is PAM, or what's the misconception, the challenge, best practice, and also all kind of industry trends and the talent development. So we learned a lot, and thank you very much for joining tonight. And for people online, I'd like to ask you to help me, do me a favor, to give a virtual applause to our panelists. And thank you very much for coming to share your insights. Thank you very much.